Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are revisiting the life and career of Patsy Cline, so stick around. All right, we've got a new music alert, ladies and gentlemen. My latest single, High Sierra Coming Down, has just dropped and is available wherever you get your music. So go ahead and check it out, send it to a friend, and remember that's High Sierra Coming Down. But first, I've got some dates, so come on out and see me. This week, October 16th, we are coming to Nashville playing the Ryman Plaza stage ahead of the Jason Isbell show. That is October 16th. And then October 24th, I'll be at Red Bus Brewing in Folsom. And then November 1st, we'll be at the R-Wagon Bar in Browns Valley for their Halloween show. And then November 11th, we will be at Harrah's Northern California in Ione. So come on out and see me. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. Everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. Alright, so I wanted to revisit Patsy Cline because I don't feel like we did her story enough justice the first time around. Because that was an early episode of the show. I think I only dedicated like 20 minutes of it to Patsy Cline, and because I had kind of mixed in Willie Nelson's story in there. And so anyway, I think I wanted to go back and kind of give it a better run. Because I think Patsy Cline she's a foundational figure in American music, and her story is worth diving into. So to set the scene here for Patsy Cline, so she's born, I think she's born in 1932, and she's born Virginia Patterson Hensley. And her parents at the time, her parents have their own kind of crazy story, where her dad was not a great dude, apparently. Same kind of deal, kind of mean drunk. They moved around a ton, and it was because, he had all kinds of legal issues he was dealing with and couldn't hold a job. And her mom, Hilda, was only 16 when Patty is born. Or when Patsy Cline is born. And she'd only gotten married 6 days before Patsy was born. So, you can imagine there's this guy that's her dad who's much older. I think he was 11 years older than her mom or something like that. So there's a 15-year-old girl running around with a 26-year-old guy. She gets pregnant, turns 16, they get married, baby's born 6 days later. And like I said, it's rocky from the jump for Patsy Cline here. So, and she's born, Virginia, and they called her Ginny. And so her parents get divorced when she's 12. And up to that, it had been just bouncing around all over the place. Like I said, Dad couldn't really hold a job down, and his marriage to her mom was just super chaotic and not very fun. So he leaves. He just takes off, abandons the family when Patsy's 12. And she kind of hangs in there for, she immediately jumps into helping her mom make a living. So she's running around doing every odd job she can get her hands on. She's doing laundry for people. She's cleaning like buses at one point. She's working little music venues for things, especially as she gets a little bit older here. And then she actually leaves school when she's 16 to focus on music and just trying to make a living with her mom. But she's joining bands and she's kind of singing around town. Her entire life up to that point had always zeroed in on, I'm going to be a famous singer when I grow up. Like Patsy Cline knew that from the minute she was born, just about. And she would have other passions kind of come and go. Like she had told her mom when she was little, like 3 or 4, that she wanted to be, like Shirley Temple. Like that was like her, like, you know, little kid idol. She wanted to learn how to tap dance and be like Shirley Temple. And then she kind of went through that for a minute. Then she wanted to play piano for a minute. And then, you know, her parents did send her to piano lessons or they sent her to friends' houses for lessons, but not like official because they couldn't afford real piano lessons. But eventually they just bought her a piano somehow. And she just kind of picked it up by ear, but that's not her main instrument. And anyway, but she had always, throughout all of that, maintained that, oh yeah, no, I'm going to be a famous singer. Like that's how this is going to go. So, like I said, by the time she's 16, she's in bands performing all around, you know, town. And like I said, so she's working odd jobs, playing things at night. Now we're into the 1950s here. This is 1952. So when she's 20 years old, her career takes a real gear change here when she meets a guy named Bill Peer. And because he was like the front man of this band that was playing around town. It was Bill Peer's Melody Boys, I think was the name of the band. And so she joins, singing harmonies and some lead stuff, kind of becomes a member of the band. And pretty quickly here, she gets romantically involved with Bill Peer, who was married at the time. And this is a problem that will persist for years. Because, you know, they're obviously like constantly rehearsing, constantly doing shows. They're together all the time, driving around town, different places. And, you know, like I said, pretty quickly that develops into a romantic relationship. And then, but Patsy's still kind of getting around town, like going on dates with other guys as well. And pretty soon after here in 1952, she meets Gerald Klein. And Gerald Klein was this guy who was, his parents, like his family owned a construction company I think it was called Klein's Construction, I think. And he had kind of grown up in this like upper middle class family. He had plenty of money coming in. He was this like stable figure that she sort of latches onto. And initially he's all about her music career, and he's, you know, like supportive and going to shows and taking her around places. And even in the beginning, it sounds like there was a lot of suspicion around like exactly what was the setup here between Patsy, Bill Peer, and Gerald Klein. Because there was a lot of weird love triangle stuff going on, and people were talking about how Gerald knew and was okay with it, but Bill's wife was not okay with it, and there was all this crazy drama going on. But it was very like, because Gerald would ask Bill to take her places. It was like, oh, hey, I'm working or whatever. Like, can you take Patsy to this show, or can you come get her and take her to practice, or can you, whatever. Or she's going to this thing for some other reason. Can you go with her just so she has somebody else like with her, kind of thing. So there was already a ton of weird, like that dynamic was not exactly normal, kind of early on. But that starts to wear on old Gerald. And actually, so right in here somewhere, I think is where she starts, right after her marriage to Gerald Klein, she starts using the name Patsy Cline, because her middle name was Patterson, which was her mom's maiden name. And so that's kind of somewhere in there, they decide Patsy Cline sounds like a better stage name. She adopts that and is, performing with Bill Peer's band. And they're with her kind of through this stage here until her, right up before her break to fame here. Because this goes on until, let's see here, 1955? Yeah, around 1955. So from 52 to 55, there's this 3-year period where Patsy is in this weird love triangle with Gerald Klein and Bill Peer. In her book, she talks about at one point she had a miscarriage, and she was like relieved. And like her friend that like had told her, like she was going on stage and she was telling her friend like, oh my God, I'm like, I feel terrible. I don't know what's going on. I've got some kind of virus. And, and they basically told her like, well, don't go on stage then if you're sick, like just, go home. And she said, no, I'll power through. And she did, but she was clearly not herself. And then, she's complaining about stomach cramps and everything else. Goes home. Her friend goes with her. And then she realizes that she's having a miscarriage. She didn't even know she was pregnant at the time. And seems to react in a way that was like, whew, that was close, because she didn't know whose it was. And, which is really dark, but I mean, I don't know. That's the 50s, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, and that did sort of put the brakes a little bit on the love triangle situation, but I don't know if she ever actually told Bill Peer or Gerald Klein about that. Like, I don't know if anyone knew until, decades later. But, and then somewhere in here, there's also the other thing that put a real damper on that whole love triangle thing is there's this awkward interaction where everybody is sitting around. I don't know if they were in the recording studio or just doing practice at somebody's house, but Bill Peer and his wife are there, and a package comes in the mail from a hotel in New York where the band had been previously. And his wife was not on that trip. Well, the package shows up at the door and says to Mrs. Bill Peer. And so she thinks, oh, like maybe Bill bought a gift for me or something and sent it, and it's just getting here now. Something she had no idea. She's, oh, it's a package for me. Rips it open, addressed to Mrs. Bill Peer, and it's Patsy Cline's jacket with a note from the hotel saying, dear Mrs. Peer, we're so, we found your jacket and we're hoping to return it to you. Sorry if we caused any inconvenience. Which basically meant that like Patsy Cline had been at that hotel with Bill Peer as like posing as his wife. They were staying together in front of everybody and just kind of kept it hush hush. So the hotel sending that jacket in blows the doors off of their little secret. And Patsy says she's quoted in her biography as like, there's this moment where Bill realizes what just happened and just says, oh shit. And everybody kind of paused, and then a giant fight breaks out between him and his wife, and there's like screaming. And she says, all hell broke loose, was her exact words. So that the end is nigh for that whole love triangle relationship thing, because things do cool off after that. And, cause they got caught red-handed. Things tend to cool down, I guess. But, and that was in 1955. So pretty quick here, she starts to make career moves that lead her away from Bill Peer's band anyway. So this is where she gets herself into a contract with Star Records. This was a mistake for the most part. Well, I mean, you call it a mistake. Maybe she wouldn't have made it without it. Who knows? But she gets herself into a record deal that is very predatory and gives her like half of what was the industry standard at the time. And the guys that ran Star Records were pretty shisty, and they were locking artists into deals that were, Now the counter to that is that Star Records picked up a lot of young talent and a lot of new people that ended up going nowhere. And so, like, they weren't locking people into where they were like indebted to the record label, but they basically were like, okay, we'll take these long chances on all these young up and coming artists. The ones that flop, no skin off our back. The ones that hit, great, but you're making up for all these flops that just happened off the back of the artist that hits, which is good for the record label. It's good for, people getting chances to do things, but it is bad for Patsy Cline, who, as far as like her royalties go. And that arrangement will plague her for a couple of years here. So that's in 1955 that happens. And she moves to Nashville during this time to like focus on the music. Now, this is where her career starts to take off, but her marriage is in its last death throes here, because Gerald Cline realizes that, you know, she's not going to be the housewife that he kind of thought. Even up to this point, it seems like he kind of thought she was going to like be a housewife, but sing on the weekends or something, you know, like that she would shift her priorities. And that was never her intention. Patsy Cline had it in her head. She was going to be famous. She was going to make it, and nothing was going to stop that lady. And that really comes to a head here in 1950, you know, late 56, early 57. Because she's starting to get these real opportunities here where she opens for Ernest Tubb. She's, you know, singing on the Opry. She's doing, she's having like, you know, some decent radio hits are coming out. And she's touring with like big name acts now every once in a while as a supporting act. So this is where in 1957, the days are really close here. So you can imagine, like I said, so they moved to Nashville in 55. Things are kind of deteriorating. Gerald Cline is kind of over the whole thing. He wants her to come home and be a housewife. And I think in the book she said like that their downstairs neighbors could fill a book with stories of the fights that they heard over this exact topic of him wanting her to be home more, kind of calling her out for still messing around with Bill Peer on the side. You know, that sort of thing. It's a pretty nasty, toxic relationship by the end. And so, July 1st, 1957, is when Patsy Cline flies, I think, to New York, to Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scout show. And she does that performance of Walking After Midnight. Now, we talked about this in the first time we talked about Patsy Cline. This is where the show had said that they wanted to only deal with artists that had representation, like they had to have an agent. And they were skeptical about agents that were family members of the artist. And so they basically had a rule that was like, no, like we're not going to promote family members of artists and agents. Like they had a rule about that. But Hildy, who is Patsy's mom, and remember that she's only 16 years older than Patsy. So a lot of people assume that they're sisters when Patsy's, 20 and her mom is 36, like that's not a giant age gap. And, so people are, it's easy for them to pass each other off as sisters. People don't assume that's her mom. And so Hildy gets on the plane and goes with her and says, and gets to Arthur Godfrey's show, and she poses as Hilda Hensley and acts as her agent without mentioning that she's her mom. And there's this great audio of that happening where the host is like, so tell us about, you've got a young artist with you, tell us about her. She's like, oh, I've brought Patsy Cline. She's from Virginia. And just kind of it's her mom talking about her as if she's just a client kind of thing. And they go, oh, well, have you known her all her life? And she's like, just about. Yeah. With this hesitation in her voice. But they pull it off and she wins the talent show. And it's, a giant leap forward in her career. So that's July 1st. 3 days later, she files for divorce from Gerald Cline. So that kind of lets you know the state of things when she got on that plane to go to New York. And then so that's July 4th, September 15th. Just a couple months later, she gets remarried to a guy named Charlie Dick. Now that period of time is when she really does seem to she breaks away from all of it. She doesn't go back to Bill Peer. She doesn't go back to Gerald Cline. She's sort of the move to Nashville did a lot to separate her from Bill Pearl because he did not go with her. And then, Gerald kind of gets tired of stuff. It falls apart. And just a couple months later, she's remarried to Charlie Dick, who is this kind of happy-go-lucky dude that she met at a dance hall, I think in South Carolina or something like that. And and he, by all accounts, is this like super supportive character. He's everything that she wanted Gerald Klein to be, minus some financial stability. Like, this is where we ran into those stories of him. I think he was there's some confusion about whether or not he actually was in the Army. I think he either was serving a brief enlistment or he was working as a civilian contractor. I'm not exactly sure how that worked, but he was getting paid by the Army. And even after his contract was up, he kept getting a couple checks, and they kind of just took the money and ran and, stayed in Nashville and kind of used that to get through some dry times. And, but anyway, so that's right in here in, the late 50s. And like I said, from here on out, Charlie Dick is like this super supportive dude. They go on to have a couple of kids. And he does the, Mr. Mom thing and is just like taking care of kids while Patsy's on the road. He never gives her any flack about her success. He just kind of buckles down and joins the team. And it's he's rumored to have had a bit of a drinking issue, but it doesn't seem to clash too hard in their marriage, at least at this point. And their marriage is relatively short. I mean, it only lasts 6 years, I think. But anyway, so now she's partnered up with Charlie Dick. And this is where we run into a fun story from the last time we talked about Patsy Cline. I told this story, but then I've since found another account of the story that is different. So basically in 1961, I guess we should back up a little bit here. So 1961, she signs with Decca Records, and she's paired up with Owen Bradley, who is a famous songwriter, producer kind of character. We should probably do an Owen Bradley episode at some point. But, and this is where she records I Fall to Pieces. And that's her first number one country hit. So we are off to the races, for Patsy Cline. And 1961 is a busy year for her. So she's got a number one hit on the radio. Here comes a brand new to town, fresh songwriter named Willie Nelson, and he is struggling. But he did just sell Hello Walls to Fair and Young, and that was the first song that kind of plucked Willie out of obscurity. We talked about this on a previous episode. And but here's where the story gets split here, because there are two people in this story. It's Willie Nelson and Charlie Dick. And the two of them tell different versions of exactly what happened here. So the way Charlie Dick tells it, he was at a bar in Nashville. He hears this record, tries to find it, runs into Willie at the Opry, and gets the record from Willie at the Opry, takes it home, plays it all night for Patsy Cline until she's sick of hearing Willie Nelson, and then the next day runs into Willie and warns Willie, hey, she's over it. Maybe don't go, she's not really into you right this second. But then the wheels churn. I think Hank Cochran was the song pitcher for Decca Records at the time. Him and Willie show up to Patsy's house to pitch the song, but Willie stays in the truck because he's scared of messing up the sale. And that's the story that we told last time, because I've seen interviews with Willie Nelson kind of corroborating that story, where he said like, oh yeah, I stayed in the truck because I just didn't want to mess up the sale, and I'd heard that she wasn't very happy with me. Like, I saw him say those words. And then I've seen footage with Charlie Dick talking about how, that's how it went down, that he got the record from Willie at the Ryman and then, played it all night, kind of forced her to listen to it, and she didn't like the song initially, and so it was like this tough sell, but they kind of push it through. The other version of the story that I've seen Willie Nelson also tell in a more recent interview, And so this is many decades later, so I don't know which of the two versions I really believe here. But the other version of the story that I heard Willie tell is that he was at Tootsie's, which is a famous bar in downtown Nashville where like a lot of the talent used to go, and they had like an artist door that like it was so all the main acts could go hang out and kind of be away from the public. Willie was hanging out in there, and that's where he ran into Charlie Dick. They got to hanging out, and Willie had a relationship with the bartender there, and like they would let him put his records on the jukebox. So it was just a record that Willie had brought with him from Texas that had Crazy on it. And that's the record that Charlie Dick hears. And in that moment, he starts talking to Willie Nelson. He gets that record out of the jukebox from Willie and tells Willie right then and there, oh, let's go take this to Patsy. And Willie says, it's midnight. Maybe we shouldn't do that. And then Charlie Dick says, no, she'll be fine. It'll be great. Let's just go do it. And so they drive across town. They go to Patsy Cline's house. And this is where Willie Nelson still says, oh yeah, I stayed in the truck. I didn't want to go in there and piss her off, which makes more sense because if it's at 1 a.m, that's a little, I wouldn't know if I would want to go in there either. So then Charlie goes inside, plays the record a bunch, and then supposedly Patsy Cline comes outside and she's the one to talk Willie Nelson into going into the house and like talking about it. Now, the reason these two stories don't line up is because one other version involves Hank Cochran, who was the song pitcher for Decca, who could not have been there if they were just driving up to the house at midnight, and that's why Willie didn't want to go in. It makes more sense if Willie stayed in the truck while Hank went inside, if that was a preordained thing, and that's why Willie knew she was upset, is because Charlie had gone home and pissed her off by playing the record a bunch of times. Like, that makes a little bit more sense to me, but I don't know. It's just this confusing, weird piece of history where it's like, you've got two primary sources, and each of them are telling the story differently. And you never know. I guess who knows what really happened. But either one of those stories is fun. So, but life is still moving at Patsy Cline really fast here, because this is 1961. This is where she, so I think it was June 14th of 1961. So the timeline of events is Willie Nelson pitches that song to her. She accepts, and they start work on the song with Owen Bradley, but she hasn't done her vocal take yet. And Owen is really leaning into like the jazzy nature behind the song. He's not really trying to turn it into a country song at all. He's just playing it. You know, he's really starting to mess with the arrangement and the mixing, which he gets some extra time to do because on June 14th is when Patsy Cline gets in this nasty car accident and is like thrown through the windshield of her car. And basically like the windshield scalped her like from the eyebrows up and like took this giant flap of skin off basically. And so they sew her back up, but like there's all this, the pictures of her right after that are pretty gnarly. I mean, she had the two scars that come down like, you know, it's just a bowl-shaped scar across both her eyebrows where they basically just had to sew her head back together. And she almost lost an eye during that deal. And this is where, like I said, I Fall to Pieces had been her number one record, and it was number one at the time. Like, it was on the radio when this is happening. And this is where you get that sweet interaction where the young Loretta Lynn has come to town. I think they've met before at this point. Like, they'd kind of met briefly at backstage at the Opry, but they weren't super well acquainted. But then Loretta Lynn does this sweet tribute to Patsy Cline live on the radio, which is like, you know, Patsy, if you can hear us, this one's for you kind of thing. And she sings I Fall to Pieces. Well, Patsy does hear it in the hospital, wired to the ceiling with one eye showing and all her bones are broken. And, you know, and she tells Charlie Dick to like invite Loretta down to say hi. And the way Loretta tells it is, you know, she walks in and feels like kind of awkward because she just sang about falling to pieces. And here's Patsy, you know, wired to the ceiling. And, but they strike up a friendship that we've talked about before, where Patsy really kind of felt like a protector for Loretta Lynn. She was going to kind of help steer her away from some bad deals and kind of help her stand up for herself around some of the more predatory male influence around town. Like, Patsy really does take her under her wing and really helps to get Loretta's career off on the right foot. And let's see here. So that starts the kind of wind down here as we get further in the story. So after her car accident, oh, well, that's not true. So after her car accident is when she's basically in bed for a month and she can't do anything. And when she comes back to work, you know, she's like, her scars are like barely healed and she hasn't really sang at all. And everybody's telling her, stay in bed, stay here, like, keep healing, like, you're fine. We've got plenty to work on. And like I said, during that month, Owen Bradley is cracking away at Crazy with the arrangement and all this, you know, doing his producer wizardry. And so the band really got a lot of extra time to work on that. And they were really, like, they were good at it. They were, you know, they had that song down, and it wasn't in the same kind of rush that most of these songs are produced in. And this is where you get, again, conflicting stories here. The lore is that Crazy was done in one take. That's true for Patsy Cline, not for the band. By the time Patsy walked in to record her vocal, there was many takes and many weeks of work and many, you know, additions and tweaks and changes being done on the music end. So she had this finely polished musical accompaniment to sing to. So the music was not one take, but Patsy walks in still sore and beat up and her head bandaged or whatever. I don't know if she was bandaged, but like scars are barely healed. And she sings this song and nails it. One take, she's done. That's the version of Crazy that we have, is Patsy Cline walked in and just did it once. And she had been pretty nervous about working with Owen Bradley kind of going forward. And she had kind of told him, because all the background vocals are all male. And she was like, I don't want you drowning me out with 4 male voices and everything else. And like, you know, she was really kind of hard on him, but he was just like, take it easy. It'll be fine. Trust me. This is going to be great. And it was. Even though she was not excited about the song initially. That's another point of conflict that I found, is that like Charlie Dick makes it sound like she did not like Crazy and she thought it wasn't country enough for her brand. It was too much of a pop song, which it did chart better on the pop charts than it did on the country charts. I think it got to number 2 on the pop charts and number 9 on the country charts, which is, I mean, it's still a crossover hit, but it was more of a pop song. And so Charlie Dick describes her complaining that it was too much of a pop song for her brand and that she wasn't really into it, but she kind of had to be talked into doing the thing. But then when Willie Nelson tells that other version of the story where he drove over there at 1 a.m, he makes it sound like eventually she came to the car and she loved the song and invited him in. I don't know. Like I said, if I didn't watch Willie Nelson say that, I would not have any, like, I'd have a lot of hesitation to believe that happened just based on the other accounts that I've read, heard, and seen. But anyway, it's not very disputed that she was not super excited about this song. She fought with Owen Bradley a lot about the arrangement and everything else. But anyway, so she does walk in, nail it. And I think that song does go to number 1 later. Because I Fall to Pieces was number 1. Oh, no, Crazy reached only number 2. So it was pretty close. And then that was 1961. Through 1962 and into 63, her career kind of maintains, she's at her peak. She's, you know, she keeps that steam from those 2 hits. She's touring all over the place. She's touring with Johnny Cash. She's playing all these great, you know, venues all over the country. And she's getting TV gigs. You know, she was performing on the Jim Reeves show. Yeah, so she's kind of, and this is the stage where, like I said, her husband is really fulfilling the Mr. Mom role. Like, she's bouncing all over the country while she's got 2 little kids at home, and Charlie Dick is just a trooper about the whole thing. And, they don't seem to have had very much conflict around that. I mean, I'm sure there was a little bit, but it wasn't like their marriage was falling apart or anything at the time. And then, after all of that, so let's see here, February 27th of 1963, she performs at the Opry, and it's her last appearance on the Opry. March 3rd, she headlines a benefit concert. It's like for a DJ's widow, I think, in Kansas City. Then March 5th, 2 days later, she's flying home, and the plane crashes, and everybody dies. And that's like, it's one of the first, I think Buddy Holly's plane crash before that, but it's one of the first real music history tragedy. It's like Hank Williams, then I think Buddy Holly, then Patsy Cline is kind of the order that sort of went in. And it just devastates her family, obviously, and it leaves this another giant hole in country music. Her and Loretta Lynn had plans to go shopping together after that happened. That obviously, that didn't happen, ever again. But all her, and then her music obviously gets a bit of a resurgence, as we've seen with all these other artists that die at their peak. And but anyway, just a real chopped end of the story, where she had so much more to do, she had so much more potential, she had so much more like opportunity coming down the pipe. We could have had decades more of Patsy Cline, but such is not the case. So, but yeah, she after she died, she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. She was the first solo female artist to get that. That was 1973. And then she received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1995. She was ranked number 11 on the VH1's 100 Greatest Women in Rock and Roll in 1999. So she's still racking up accolades, even after her death. And, her songs still do great. I mean, everybody loves Patsy Cline, and here we are, 50 years later, 60 years later. And, she's still just a pillar of the genre. And a pretty cool lady at that. So that's Patsy Cline. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.